Hey guys, it's Julian, and today I'm going to be giving you 5 essential tips for all techno producers. I want to make a video like this, just sort of like a simple little video that you can get started with that can give you some things that I think will really help you to clear up some misconceptions and things that a lot of people who maybe are just getting started with making techno, or maybe even you're more, established with it, you may even already have some releases. And these tips can help everybody. I think these are very universal tips and I think these can take you very far and give you some good ideas to springboard some of your own ideas. I have this little track idea in front of me that I'm going to be using to explain some of this stuff. And yeah, and so if you guys want to support me, I'll also say really quick the link to all my sample packs is in the description. They're all just like $5 or $10. And if you want to support me, it's a great way to do it. I don't make a whole lot of money off these videos, but if you get those, it allows me to keep putting food on the table so I can keep making this video for you guys and keep improving the quality every single day. So yeah, let's get into the tips. So the first tip here is less is more. So this seems like maybe a very obvious one, but it's not so obvious, I think, when you're starting. And what I mean by less is more is essentially if you can say more with less elements, you should always go for less elements. So like, for example, in this track here, I'll hit play on it. This is literally just 3 things that you're hearing here. And with these 3 things, we just have a kick, which gives us plenty of low end and a bit of mid range even. We have a hi-hat, which gives us the sharp high end. And then we have a lead, which kind of fills out the mid range and the high end. And even a little bit the low end. And like I said, with these 3 things, we're able to say plenty of things. This gives us a lot of space in the mix, where we're still filling out the frequency range and the frequency spectrum, to say, but we're not like overdoing it. It's still enough stuff that you can pick apart every single individual thing that's happening, and you can kind of find some space to fit yourself in there. Something that I've learned a lot, and actually I learned this not just from listening to techno, I learned this from listening to a lot of other music, is like, it's not about filling up the space in the track. It's kind of more about creating a space that people can then sort of like fit themselves into and create their own feelings on. So like in the case of this, you hear the lead, you hear the kick, you hear the hi-hat, your brain quickly perceives those 3 things. And then it kind of gives you some space to think. And that's essentially the space I'm talking about. On a more scientific, sort of, I guess, objective level, it's really just sort of space to think. It's like if you have too many things happening, like say we had like 3 other hi-hats, a percussion loop, maybe like a droning synth under this, some stabs. If all that stuff was happening, you wouldn't be able to really think because your brain would be so overwhelmed by everything that it's being hit with that, again, it just wouldn't really be a lot of space for you to think. But with this, where it's simple but still saying everything that you need to say with just 3 elements, you're able to kind of think while you're listening to it. And it creates a sort of connection between the song and the listener that I think you can't get otherwise, and that you definitely can't get if it's too busy. Another thing with this is it's kind of, like I said, about optimizing these 3 elements, or maybe you don't have to just use 3, I try to say no more than 10 elements per track. I try to aim closer to 5, but it's about sort of, like there are some techniques that you can use with using only a few elements like this that I'm going to talk about in the video to, make them a bit bigger and still make it sound like a really full thing and not just 3 elements, but 3 elements being used very well in the track. But yeah, and the thing about the less is more thing that I think is really important is like the number one piece of advice I've always gotten from labels is just do less. Like whenever I send tracks into labels, especially like when I was earlier on with my techno production, maybe not so much now because I kind of understand this. Like, I would always get good feedback, and they'd always say like, these are solid tracks. The kick is good, the hi-hats are good, the lead is good. It just was like a lot of times they would say it's just too much happening, and this is where I really learned the skill of less is more. So I think that's a really important one. That's why I made it the first point in this video. The second point in this video, and the second tip that I think is really important, is using sends instead of more percussion. So what I mean by this is, as you can hear here, the only drums that we have are a kick and a hi-hat. And those 2 on their own, it's pretty full. But it's still obviously not as much as you would typically hear in a techno track. So a lot of times people think to add like a hi-hat under that, or maybe like a percussion loop or more hi-hats on top of it. That can work, but I think you can do the same thing with sends. So what I mean by this is we can create a return track over here, and then I'll send the hi-hat, and we'll send the kick through it as well. And then I have this little rack over here that I've saved, where essentially what you do is you put like some delays and maybe a few different effects as well. Like, here it is. And you can hear it. So we just have an echo, a grain delay, a little bit of some more delay at a different time, some saturation, and then a bit of a high pass. And there we go. Now we're getting a whole different percussion loop in the background. But it's clear that it's being generated from the percussion that we already had. So this way, instead of adding like, I could probably fill out the same amount of the frequency spectrum as this is, using like a percussion loop and another hi-hat, maybe another hi-hat on top of that. But like I said, if we do this with a send, this way we can create some percussion and the listener knows that it's coming off of these two. So then it's still the same simple groove, but it's just kind of using less to say more, like I said. So the third tip that I think is really important for techno producers is great sounds don't really need much. And what I mean by this is like, if you have like a solid lead like this, like for example, this lead doesn't really have that much processing on it, all things considered. Like this is a very fat lead just coming straight out of the synth. I'll play it with no effects on it so you can hear what I'm talking about. We already have a very nice pattern with it. You can see it plays like this cool kind of simple lead line, which would work really well on any synth. Really, it's not just about the synth sound, but then we have this nice, fat, super solid type of sound that's being created using wavetable here. You can see I've got this cool unison mode where it's set to the noise. So it's like we already have a great sound. We already have a sound that's working really, really well. We don't really need that much processing, and I can even get rid of some of the stuff, to be honest. We don't really need that much processing to kind of like bring it into the track. At this point, all you really need is just a little bit more stuff to give it a little bit of oomph, but you're not looking to the processing to do everything. I think too often, especially with techno, where like, sometimes you're not always making a melodic lead like this. Sometimes you're making something that's a bit more rhythmic and a bit more straightforward in that sense. So it can seem like a good idea to add a lot of processing, but it's like, again, if you have a really great sound, the processing is really not going to matter. And that's what you need to think about is like, if you're making a track and you find yourself adding a lot of processing to a lead or to even like a hi-hat or something like that, you can see like these hi-hats don't really need much processing, just a bit of drum bus to make them hit a little bit more and a bit of a high-pass filter just to clean it up. If you find that you're adding too much stuff, then you probably just need to rethink your sound. Maybe try different MIDI, a different sound, maybe a different MIDI and a different sound. Maybe it's just time to throw away the sound you're working on. It's like, don't get too attached to anything. I think that's what it really is like, when you get too attached to a sound, you get stuck with like, oh, well, if I just add another saturation or if I add some more reverb or something like that, it's going to be perfect. And it's like, that's not really true. You just have to kind of like open your mind a little bit, and maybe you just need to try something different. Maybe it's just time to do that. I think something that's really, this is what I really love about making techno is like just how quickly it can work, and when it's not working, how quickly you can figure out that it's not working. And I think you just need to be able to do that. You can see like, again, great lead, doesn't really need much. Maybe a little bit of chorus. We don't even really need that chorus. A little bit of echo, because you still want to give your sound some space. A little bit of drum bus, because you need to make your sound fatter. You can't just have the dry synth sound coming out of the synth. And then just a little bit of EQ, just to clean up the low end. And all of these are pretty transparent as well. When you hear it, obviously you hear the echo on there. And you hear, like, you don't even really hear the drum bus. You just hear that it's a very fat lead. And then the EQ is just cutting. It's not really boosting. There's maybe like you would do a little bit of a high-end boost, but with the low-end cut there, again, it's just kind of like very transparent effects. You really don't need to do much when you have a great sound. And Of course, there's exceptions to every rule. Sometimes you do want something to sound really, really processed. Maybe you need to add extra stuff. I won't say like this should always be your chain, but it's like in general, if you're having a hard time with a sound and you feel like, oh, let me just add one new effect to it, or let me just change like it from a saw wave to a square wave or something like that, maybe it might be time to just try something new. So yeah, and then going with that, the fourth tip here is don't waste your time. Like I said, something that I find very liberating about techno, and something that I really love about making techno, is just how quickly the track can come together. It's not hard. It's like when you have your elements like this, you can start really arranging them pretty much right off the bat. Like let's say maybe we'll have just the kick in the beginning, and then we can have the hi-hats start coming in here, and then maybe like the lead would start coming in through here. It's like already I have 2 minutes of this track just from kind of like arranging these in a smart way. And then maybe from here you could add some automation, like maybe we would high pass the kick in the beginning here. And then you'd automate that to turn off like after 16 bars or so, or maybe let's do 8 bars. It's like you can see, when we have powerful, strong elements like this, it doesn't really take a whole lot to get a nice arrangement going. And so this is why I say, don't waste your time. You really don't need to waste a whole lot of time on these things, especially if you're using reference tracks and you're really like analyzing and breaking down what is working well about all these different professional tracks that you're hearing. It's like, yeah, you really don't need to waste your time too much on a whole lot of like thinking about the arrangement. Just get in, make it very functional and very strong for like a powerful, big techno track, and it all should come together pretty quickly. I think, again, this goes back to the last tip. It's like if you're wasting your time and you're spending too much time thinking too much, that's when it starts to become really complicated. But if you don't waste your time, it's pretty smooth. And yeah, and then the last tip here is louder is always perceived as better, even if it isn't better artistically. So what I mean by this, and this is something that I have learned not just from techno, I've learned this from like producing hip hop and playing beats for people and producing house music, producing like even drum and bass, Whenever you're playing something for somebody, like say you're pitching a demo to a label, or maybe you're pitching a collab to somebody else, if you send them one track that's at -5 and one track that's at, say, -3 or -2, the -3 or -2 track is always going to make them kind of like get into it a little bit more. And it's always going to make it hit a little bit more because, honestly, people just like things that are louder, especially with techno where it's like you're making music that's supposed to be very full force and very in your face. So if you have a track that's a little bit quieter and then you play a track right after it, that may not even be a better track. Maybe it might be a worse track for whatever reason, subjectively or objectively. They're going to oftentimes perceive the louder track as better. So that's something to keep in mind, If you want your tracks to be perceived as the greatest tracks, make a really, really good track and then make sure that it's loud enough to where when you send it to somebody, they'll really like it and they'll want to either sign it or play it out. It's not hard, but this is, again, one of those things that I think, like, when you're first starting, you kind of overlook, you might look at it and just think, oh, man, this track is so great. Like, let me just export it at -5. But, again, like, I think a lot of times if you play 2 demos for a DJ or for a label owner, and one's at -5 and one's at -2, they're going to like the one that's at -2 a little bit more. Of course, this is all depends, like, if you play them a horrible track at -2 and a really high quality track at -5, they'll probably take the quieter one in that case. But if it's between, like, say you send the track to a label and they're trying to put together a compilation, like, let's just say hypothetically, you sent the track to Drum Code and they're sitting there. They might just choose the one, even if it's like another person's track that isn't quite on the same level as yours. They might just choose the louder one just because, they're turning it up in the office and they're like really getting into it more. And then when they turn yours on, it's just like, it's going to be harder for them to get into that. So it's just something to keep in mind. Again, make the best possible track and then make sure that it's loud enough for these labels and these DJs to really get into it when they play it against other tracks. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, guys. I just want to give you 5 tips that I think could really help speed up the process if you're either a new techno producer, or maybe you're an older techno producer and you just needed some new inspiration and, maybe you've hit some word blocks in your production or whatever it may be. I want to give you guys some tips that can work really well for that. So that's me for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. as always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, if you guys want to support me, a great way to do that is to check out my sample packs and my Patreon in the description. Both links are right at the top of the description. All the sample packs on my Bandcamp are just julianro.bandcamp.com. They're all just $5 or $10. You know, it's not that expensive, but you get some really high quality sounds, and it's a great way to support me as well and keep me going so that I can keep making these videos. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.